Dan, it's 6 o'clock. I think we could start.
All right. Thank you, Jared Silva. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director at the Division of Marine Fisheries. I have a bunch of staff with me as well tonight. I've got Deputy Director Bob Glenn. I've got Assistant Director Anna Webb. Going down the roster, I've got Nicola Meserve. I've got Derek Perry. There's some other staff that as well, Laura Tomlinson. I'm kind of scouring for the list, but suffice to say, there's a lot of the DMF staff who are present and will assist me in answering any of your questions. We also have commission members. We have Ray Kane. We have Eric Nelson, and we have Willie Goldsmith. I don't know who else has joined since I last scanned the list. So tonight is a meeting scheduled by the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission and the Division of Marine Fisheries. And thank you for indulging us to have moved this meeting from an in-person meeting, which was scheduled for 2 days ago at Mass Maritime, to this virtual meeting tonight. I know there's a few folks around the Cape and Islands area and South Coast area who still do not have power. And for that reason, we're adding a second session, which would be identical to this session, and that would be next Wednesday. Also, it's going to be virtual. We weren't able to schedule a room where people could be present in person. So thank you for joining us tonight. I see we already have something in the realm of, over 53 attendees, so that's great. So tonight we're going to be taking comment on what we typically describe as our omnibus rules, things we change at the beginning of the calendar year for the upcoming calendar season or the fishing season. Doesn't mean everything changes, but this is kind of the rhythm of rulemaking these days. And we're going to be taking comment on 6 different items. Just for the record, we've got the statutory authority of General Law, Chapter 30A, which is the statute that requires us to hold this hearing. And then we're talking about the statutory authority given to the DMF by the legislature of Chapter 130, Sections 217A, 21, 38B, and 80. And we're taking public comments on 3 different chapters of the regulations, chapters 4, 6, and 7. And these draft regulations seek to, 1, allow any existing coastal lobster permit holder whose corresponding vessel holds a federal lobster permit to permanently surrender that coastal lobster permit in a one-time exchange for an offshore lobster permit. We can get into those details later. 2, eliminate some outdated and superfluous regulated fishery permit endorsements. Number 3, create a sea scope dredge width that conforms with the federal standards. Number 4, liberalize commercial fishing limits for scup, black sea bass, and summer flounder. 5, liberalize recreational limits for bluefish. And number 6, and one that's probably gaining the most attention, is horseshoe crab management and allocations of quota and changes to quotas. So because we added a second hearing, the public comment for all of these rules is now extended to next Friday, March 6th. And you can send comment letters to the Division of Marine Fisheries to my attention. It's probably not in your best interest to send me direct emails because I have to if I receive those emails, I have to send them to the Marine Fish account because staff try to compile those. So I will read them all. I promise you that. But it's much better for the agency to receive these in one place and not have different staffers receiving them and then have to recompile them to make sure that they're all accounted for. So you have until a week from Friday to get those in. So next slide, please. The timeline for rulemaking. We announced these draft regulations back in January on the 30th. We held a public comment, are holding a public comment period. It says January 30th to February 27th. We've actually extended that by another week, as I mentioned earlier. We have public hearings tonight and next Wednesday. We expect the commission to deliberate on these issues, meaning I will make a recommendation to them on most, if not all, of the items at the March 17th meeting, and that gives us enough time to get final rules on the books by May 1st. So as far as tonight's procedures, we will present on each public hearing proposal. At the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions, and then we'll take comments. You can use your raise hand function to ask a question or to make a comment. If the audio doesn't work, you'll be given an opportunity at the end of the queue. We'll do our best to get you involved. Commenters will be provided one opportunity to comment on each topic. We'll work through the queue. If there's ample time, we'll let you make a second comment if that's necessary. Try to limit comments to 2 minutes. Try to be respectful, direct the comments to DMF, although I don't know that I think it's the tone and tenor of virtual hearings is usually less dramatic than sometimes the stuff we see in public. So I don't have any concerns about that. And try to address comments that are specific to these proposals. If comments become redundant, we may ask everybody just to move on. This isn't town meeting where everybody gets a vote. We want to hear the themes. We want to hear your arguments. And that's why we're holding this hearing tonight. We also encourage written comments, and because we will bring all of the written comments and forward them to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission with our final recommendations. And the final recommendations would include a short summary and a discussion of your comments, a general discussion of what the public said about these issues. Next slide, please. Public hearing agenda tonight. We're going to go in this order. We're going to go recreational bluefish limits, commercial lobster permitting, the mobile gear permitting issues, scalloped shucking endorsement, dredge width on the scallop vessels, commercial scup limits, commercial black sea bass, commercial summer flounder, and then horseshoe crab. So our first issue is recreational bluefish limits, and Nicola Meserve, who is my proxy at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission for bluefish and a handful of other species, is going to give the short presentation. Nick?
All right, thank you, Dan. We'll jump right into our one recreational item for this evening, centered on bluefish. This is a stock that entered a rebuilding plan several years ago, back in 2020. And since then, there's the most recent stock assessment indicates that the stock is growing and responding to their rebuilding measures, and is actually ahead of the 7-year rebuilding plan that's to get to a rebuilt stock by 2028. So in response to that, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, per the advice of their Scientific and Statistical Committee, increased their recreational harvest limit by 40% for 2026, and that allows for some liberalization of the measures. Currently, there is an open season year-round, no size limit, and what we refer to as a mode split in the possession limits, with anglers fishing from shore or a private vessel allowed to take 3 fish, and anglers fishing aboard a for-hire vessel allowed to take 5 fish. And those are the rules that were put in place at the beginning of the rebuilding program in 2020. So the action to increase the harvest limit led the council and commission to also increase those daily possession limits by 2 fish in each of the modes. So this proposal is simply to match those. And so that would mean a 5 fish limit for those fishing from shore or a private vessel, and 7 fish for those fishing from a for-hire vessel. according to MRIP, there's not a lot of anglers that are currently limiting out at the current limits, but this increase is allowed, and we anticipate that most states will be adopting them. The federal rules will be changing, so our changing them will benefit compliance and enforcement by having consistent measures across states and state and federal waters. And there are members of the fishery that have increased these have sought an increase in the bag limits across the last several years as the species has been rebuilding. So that is the proposal and the rationale, and we can take any questions.
Thank you, Nicola. So because this is a kind of an East Coast standard, um, I don't think there's too much to discuss, but let's take your comments or any questions at this time. Is there anyone, Jared?
Mike Paulison, do you have a comment or question on recreational bluefish? Mike, your audio is not working. We'll come back to you. Parker Mock, I apologize if I mispronounced that. Do you have a question or comment about recreational bluefish?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Thank you. Just three quick points. I do recognize the benefit of having these limits be consistent with the entire East Coast. I mean, that confusion is great when we can avoid it. But I would like to make just a couple of quick points about bluefish in general. We had this high bag limit for many, many years. We experienced overfishing and realized that there was a problem, and the bag limits were lowered to try to deal with that. And based on the information you guys have provided, it seems like that's been good and that we are approaching and anticipating hitting our goal set for the biomass in general of bluefish. I would advocate that it's better to wait until we actually do that. You also mentioned that commercial quotas have not been getting met and that recreational anglers are also tending not to meet their quotas. Anecdotally, spent a lot of time in Buzzards Bay and around the islands. I don't think that there's as many bluefish out there as we used to see, for sure, and as many as people would like to see. So I'd be in support of waiting until we actually have hit the goals that we set for ourselves before we actually change rules in anticipation of that. There's not as many bluefish as we used to see. I would personally like to see more, and I'd advocate waiting until we're in a position where we can say we've hit the goal line. Thank you.
Thank you, Parker. Mike Paulison, let's try you again. Mike, I'm not hearing you. You can type your comment into the chat, and I'm going to go to Matt Shore. Matt, you're up. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly second Parker's very well stated comment there. I agree that it sounds premature to change the regulation there before reaching the goal.
Thank you, Matt. All right, I'm not seeing any further hands raised on this unless Mike Paulison can figure out his audio or submit a question in the chat.
Jared, if Mike has audio issues all night, we could try to address whatever concerns he has through the next hearing. Like if he wrote to us, we could maybe bring it up on the record and
Yeah,
try to respond to
absolutely.
that. Okay.
Okay, moving on to the next item on tonight's hearing.
All right, the next topic has to do with commercial lobster permitting. And so this comes from a request we've gotten from a couple of permit holders, and it has to do primarily with the owner-operator requirement of our coastal lobster permit. So we issue two kinds of commercial lobster permits. one is called the coastal lobster permit, and this permit allows a boat to set lobster traps in Massachusetts territorial waters, as well as land lobsters in a Massachusetts port taken from the federal zone. The second kind of lobster permit we issue is just called an offshore lobster permit, and that's issued to those permit holders or those fishermen who don't have the coastal lobster permit. The coastal lobster permit is kind of considered, more of a premier permit for that reason. And so a lot of our management that we've done is done sort of in the vein of managing the coastal lobster fishery, even though we know our fishery does take place in the federal zone as well. So the coastal lobster permit has an owner-operator requirement, which means the permit holder, the named permit holder, has to be on the vessel when the vessel is participating in the coastal lobster fishery. So the other permit does not. And so, it was brought to our attention by some permit holders that fish exclusively in the federal zone with a coastal lobster permit, that if they could, they would like to swap that permit out and basically avoid the owner-operator requirement. I would say that the owner-operator requirement was something that has been strongly endorsed by the majority of the state's active lobstermen, and is also a requirement of other states, particularly in Maine, where there's an owner-operator requirement for all of their permits, whether the boat is fishing in state or federal waters. So I'd also like to mention that we have a moratorium affecting Area 1, where we're no longer issuing the offshore lobster permit to anyone from Area 1. And this was done to prevent splitting of the state and federal permits. It's been sort of affectionately known as the pregnant boat syndrome, where a boat might have a federal permit and a state permit, and then try to split them into two and operate two different vessels. So we don't issue any new offshore lobster permits for that reason. So we've had a concern about effort in Area 1, but I think through our policies, with the support of the lobster industry, I believe that to date that concern has been addressed really well. And so that's what this proposal is about primarily. Let me get to the next slide, Jared. So that is the proposal to allow a coastal lobster permit holder on a one-time basis to have the to swap out that to swap out that coastal access permit. To swap out the coastal lobster permit in order to fish exclusively in the federal zone. So why don't we take any questions on that, and we can and then take comments.
We go to Jim Bartlett. Good evening, Jim. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me, Jared?
I can, Jim. Go right ahead.
This was a comment that I had more than a question. Should I wait?
Go right ahead. It's only you and Mike Paulison with your hands raised right now.
We tried this years ago, Jared. It definitely should be owner-operator in Area 1, state and federal. If not, this is going to turn into a circus. Can already see it happening, and it's going to get worse. It definitely needs to be owner-operator, out 40 miles, state and federal in Area 1.
Hey, Jim.
Yes, Dan.
Yeah, if I could address that. So as I mentioned, Maine has that on their books now. We do not. We only have the owner-operator requirement affixed to the coastal lobster permit. So there are vessels now that would not be required to have an owner-operator requirement if they only have the offshore permit and they have a federal area one. But I would say that moving forward, there's going to be a management strategy evaluation done by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And there's going to be a lot of very substantive discussions about how to manage the lobster fishery, especially given the fallout of the gauge increase. We definitely want to get industry support for whatever we're going to do moving forward. And I will predict that this issue, access to permits and these kind of details are probably going to be front and center of that management strategy evaluation. So I hear your concern, but I do want you to know that under the current rules, there aren't many. I mean, I don't know, it may be in single numbers that are able to operate a lobster business in the EEZ without being owner operator. But so anyway, but you and your organization should probably be prepared to sort of engage with the other Area 1 states, Maine and New Hampshire, to try to get the permitting issues, more consistent. I mean, each state's kind of had its own path or made some of its own decisions about permitting. And so I see that maybe needing to, if not come together, at least sort of try to do things in a more consistent format. And that may be something that you do. And if you do favor something like that, then maybe the guys who have already capitalizing on the non-owner operator status would be grandfathered in or something. But I hear where you're coming from, and I think that's consistent with the MLA comments.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And like I say, Maine's already got it. They already do it. New Hampshire, that's a nightmare because they got all kinds of donkeys running boats in federal waters that it causes a big issue. And I can see it coming. It's going to be a circus. So that's my comment anyway. Owner operator in Area 1.
All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Dan.
Kellen O'Malley, you're up next.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
I can. Kellen, go right ahead.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm a permit holder here in the state of Massachusetts as well as a federal permit holder. And I agree with Jim's point on this being owner operator. I'm actually shocked to hear this proposal, to be honest with you, just in considerations to the ongoing efforts within the industry with the North Atlantic right whale, specifically to enforcement. The owner operator brings a piece to it where it's the responsibility of the person who owns the permit, who's on the boat, to make sure that the gear is handled properly. It's moved out of closures, as well as any measures we're taking to protect these whales. And I have a lot of concern with the responsibility if the state were to allow such fishery to not be owner operator. And more so the conversion of these state permits to become federally allowed without the operator on board. The way I see the fishery now, I think it's been extremely responsible in the last number of years, which is obviously of great importance in regards to those conflicts. So I think it would be a huge mistake by the state to allow the conversions of these permits to be non-owner operator. And without getting further into it, it's one of probably the strongest points within the industry, which I think Dan had already put forth. So I think we'd be going in the wrong direction, allowing these permits to be converted outside of the owner operator rules. That's all I have.
Thank you, Kellen.
Thank you.
Steve Boudreau, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. Steve, go right ahead.
So I I as well am a dual permit holder from the state of Massachusetts. And I oppose the notion of allowing somebody to turn in a state permit for a landing permit or a whatever you want to call it. Strictly because I have fished quite a bit up off of New Hampshire where there's been a number of boats over the years that have been allowed to have one of these landing permits and fish EEZ only. And they have hired captains on the boat that um don't have the same investment as the boat owner himself would have. And it may start out well, but then as the boat makes less and less money and there's not enough to go around for the owner, the crew, the captain, things tend to fall apart. The gear isn't maintained the way it should. Um, and a lot of problems start generating from it. And I think that this is a terrible idea. And I think that if somebody owns a boat um, in Area One, I think they need to be the one running it. And I think it's irresponsible at this point with everything going on um, in the lobster industry with the right whales to allow this to happen. Quite frankly, there's a giant spotlight cast on us, and I think this is a step in the wrong direction.
Okay, appreciate the comments, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mike, I'm going to go to you again and see if your audio works this time. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
Hey,
me,
Mike,
Jerry?
how you doing
Hey.
this evening?
I just wondered if there's some way you can turn the volume down on your end because I get in a wicked echo and I've changed my earphones twice.
I'm not sure if I can do that on my end. Shouldn't, that's interesting. I'll look into it.
All
Did
right,
you
I'll
have a,
try.
did you have a comment on either the wrecked bluefish or this commercial lobstering proposal?
No, I'll pass on. I'll pass on this one.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right.
All right, Dan, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments on the commercial lobster permitting proposal, so we'll go to the coastal access permit.
Okay, everyone. Thank you. So this next issue is an interesting one. Earlier in my career, around the early 90s, we created this permit called the Mobile Gear Coastal Access Permit. It was the permit you needed to fish with otter trawls and scallop dredges and Scottish and Danish seines, although I don't think anyone does that anymore. And it was enacted because we were concerned about a lot of displaced effort into Massachusetts state waters from the federal zone when the New England Council and NOAA Fisheries got really aggressive about trying to conserve groundfish in the early 90s. And so we've created that permit, and then we went further down the road and we created like extra endorsements. So if any boat had one of these coastal access permits and they were involved with some of the other fisheries, such as the squid fishery, fisheries that were really distinct. So there was squid, there was whiting, there were some of these sub-endorsements. And so when we created these sub-endorsements, we did it because we wanted a way to get data collection from the individual vessels, as well as a way to reach out to those vessels. Because remember, this is the 1990s where we didn't have the social media and the email and all that we have today. So we wound up creating a fair number of these endorsements that frankly have become kind of useless or redundant. I mean, if a vessel has a coastal access permit, in our view, then they should be allowed to fish for whiting, squid, sea herring, fish in the North Shore mobile gear area, because we don't really have any additional reporting requirements. And it's easy enough to reach out to the boats that do that. So we also created something called the CAP scallop dredge endorsement, and that was, believe it or not, given to a small number of permit holders who weren't draggers per se. Most of them were lobstermen, but they had towed a scallop dredge during their period of eligibility. So we created this other permit just to allow them to continue their operations. So our proposal is to eliminate those coastal access permit sub-endorsements and the coastal access permit scallop dredge endorsements. So if you have a coastal access permit with, and then any of those, then you're just going to get a coastal access permit. You don't no longer have to give us $30 for every endorsement. Um, and it would just be much simpler. We've gotten some good feedback on this from our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. And we think this is just a cleaner way to manage the permitting system in a more modern way that kind of gets rid of some of the redundancy. So I'll take any questions.
Andrew Walsh, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jared?
Yes, go right ahead.
So I have really just a question. It's not a comment or anything. With this proposal, just hypothetically, if it's a lobster boat that had the scallop dredge cap, and they also held, say, a fluke endorsement, like a rod and reel fluke endorsement or a sea bass endorsement, would that then make them eligible to put a net reel on the stern and set out an otter trawl and say go fluke it in the sound?
It would, but the reality of the permitting situation is I think there are 7 of these. Most of them are located on the North Shore. They don't have those additional species-specific endorsements, groundfish, fluke, sea bass. So without getting a transfer of one of those endorsements to them to become a dragger, they'd still kind of be limited as a lobster boat with and sea scallop dredging.
All right, Jared. I was just asking for clarification.
Yeah.
I'm
So
not
technically,
opposed to it.
yes, but in practicality, no, or not
All right.
likely.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I just wanted a clarification. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Andrew. Phil Michaud, how you doing this evening? Phil, you can unmute yourself.
Are you hearing me okay?
I can hear you now, Phil. Go right ahead.
Wonderful. Does this enable them, or will it still require a groundfish endorsement?
Yeah, so none of the species-specific endorsement requirements would change. It's just the various kind of gear-specific mobile gear fishing endorsements for small mesh, for squid whiting and sea herring, and to fish in those North Shore areas. That rather than having an endorsement for each of those activities, you would just get the cap and would cover all your mobile gear fishing. But if you're to retain whatever species, if they're regulated and permitted species, sea bass, scallop, fluke, groundfish, you'd still need the additional species-specific endorsement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Good answer, Jared.
So Dan, I'm not seeing any other hands raised on this. So there were just 2 questions there.
Sure.
For mobile gear fishers, and we can move on to the sea scallop shucking endorsement.
Yeah, so I don't know, over 40 years ago, someone thought we needed to create an endorsement for sea scallop shucking, which sort of separated those vessels that landed whole in-shell product. And I think it was a public health requirement at the time, but the endorsement has become superfluous. I believe we sell that endorsement at no charge, right? It's unlike the coastal access permits. So yeah, so we're trying to simplify the system, and we definitely don't feel, and we've checked with public health on this, that they're comfortable if we eliminate this endorsement. Any
it would still
questions
allow
on
the
that?
shucking of scallops.
Of course, thank you.
But it would just not require an additional endorsement to do that. In fact, shuck scallops are probably the primary product that's being brought in because of water quality closures restricting retention of whole and shell products in most areas. So
Any
not
questions?
seeing any comments here or questions, Dan. We can move on to the dredge width proposal.
Great. Yeah, the sea scallop dredge width are Our current rule is out of phase with the federal standards. Our 10-foot sea scallop, 10-foot wide maximum width of a sea scallop dredge is smaller than the 10.5-foot dredge size that is allowed in the federal regulations, and vessels that might fish in the same season on either side of the line could potentially be in violation with the same gear. And we didn't feel that the differential between those two rules was necessary. And in fact, it was brought to our attention by a scalloper who said that, can you fix that? It seems like just a technical issue, and without any justification. He didn't want to suffer a violation by the environmental police for something that really wasn't intended. So again, it's just a minor change to match the dredge width by adding 6 inches to the state rule.
Yeah, this has kind of become more of a thing in recent years with the proliferation of that northern Gulf of Maine springtime fishery, where boats are fishing both, in Mass Bay and state and federal waters on the same trip. So, Mike Paulison, you're up.
Come in. Can you hear me?
I can, Mike. Go right ahead.
I totally support this proposal to increase it to 10.5 so that it's the same in federal as it is in state.
Thank you, Mike. Andrew Walsh.
Yeah, I want to support this also. I believe that anytime that the state can try to mirror federal regulations, it's a good thing. There's other fisheries that we have similar issues with where regulations are slightly different, and I think that it's a good thing to try to get in line with the federal, because a lot of guys do fish on both sides of the line, and it's definitely a pain having to deal with 2 different sets of regulations.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, Dan, I'm not seeing any comments here, so I'll give you a break in talking and handle the next couple issues.
Actually, Jared, I think you've got the next 3. You've got Scup,
sea bass, and
fluke, and then I'll
turn it over to you for the encore on horseshoe crabs.
Thank you.
All right. So the stock assessment for scup shows that it's not overfished and not experiencing overfishing. In fact, the spawning stock biomass is at over 300% of its target, while fishing mortality is only around 55% of its threshold. We expect the summertime period quota, which is May to September, that's the state managed period, to decrease from 1.64 million pounds last year to 1.45 million pounds this year, and then 1.31 million pounds in 2027. But despite those slight decreases, you'll see in the graph on the right, we're hardly approaching 1 million pounds of scup landed. In most years, we're underutilizing that quota by a good amount, and the summer fishery typically lands about 600,000 pounds of the quota, so it's about 50% underutilized or more. So we received a request from industry to make our rules more consistent across seasons. You'll see in the chart that the summer fishery, we have a 10,000 week allowance for trawl gear, and a weir allowance of up to 300,000 pounds of the quota to be taken during the summer fishery. And then we have the directed gears, hook and pot gears, where we have different rules for May, June, and July, September. So the May fishery starts off Sunday through Thursday at an 800-pound trip limit. Then it gets decreased in June to Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and a 400-pound trip limit. And that was done maybe about 10, 15 years ago when we were attempting to rebuild the stock and have a reduced effort at a time of year where scup typically spawn. So June's when the primary spawning season, and that was done to kind of decrease fishing effort at that time of year. Then on July 1, those limits go back up for the remainder of the season for Sunday to Saturday to at 1,500 pounds per trip. What the proposal is looking to do is to, at a minimum, match the June rules, open days on Sunday to Thursday at 800 pounds per trip, or to match the June rules to what's happening in May. So to go from Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 400 pounds a trip in June to Sunday through Thursday at 800 pounds of trip in June. Will provide greater access to the resource when the fish are available. Ensure June's good scup fishing in Buzzards Bay and in the Sounds. There's ample quota available to accommodate these increase in landings. The stock's in tremendous shape, so the benefits derived from slightly more conservative limits in June may be diminished comparatively to the economic benefits of this. And that request came from a commercial fisher who asked us to take this out to public hearing. So we thought that that was a reasonable request, a reasonable amendment to our management program. And that's what we're here tonight to discuss on SCUP. So I'll take questions or comments. And Mike Paulison, it looks like you're up first.
Come in, Jared. My feelings on this whole proposal is that the state should increase the limits as much as possible so that the state of Massachusetts fishermen can totally utilize all their allocated quota. And whatever it means you need to do to get that done, I support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Go ahead.
Okay, is there anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing any other oh, Andrew Walsh, you're up.
I'd like to support the proposal. I feel like it's unnecessary to keep the trip limits that low when we're underutilizing the quota by 50%.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, Mike, second bite at the apple. No? Okay. So I'm not seeing any other comments here, Dan. We'll move on to Seabass. So Seabass, the 2025 assessments showed that the stock was not overfished or experiencing overfishing. Spawning stock biomass is again quite high at almost 300% of its target, while fishing mortality is only at 73% of its threshold. Quota expectations for the next 2 years is that the quota is going to increase by about 30% to just over 1 million pounds. We've been at about 800,000 for the past couple seasons, and we'll be moving up to 1 million pounds. If you look at the quota or the annual landings graph on the right, you'll see that, we've approached close to 1 million pounds in 2024. I think we had a transfer that year from another state to keep it open. So under current rules, we can approach that 1 million pound limit if by just virtue of having the fishery go a little longer. We took that 800,000 pound quota this year on October 24th. So there might be a need to slightly liberalize that rules, but we can easily take this sea bass quota with minor modifications. We timed the fishery to start at July 1 after the spawning period. So we're not looking to start the fishery earlier because catch rates during that spawning period are tremendously high. And if you go back 15 years when we had a fishery then, it was a bit of a disaster at times with the amount of effort close to shore and kind of the derby fishery and some of the enforcement challenges that went along with that. While the fishery closes, usually between mid-September and mid-October. So with the current rules, so what we're looking to do is 3 things. We're looking to adjust the timing of the existing quota use-based trip limit, which increases the trip limit to 500 pounds to 600 pounds for potters and 250 pounds to 300 pounds for hook and line. on September 15th, and if at least 15% of the quota remains, we're looking to move that date a bit earlier in the season so that it happens at least by September 1. We're looking to similarly adjust the timing of a built-in automatic opening of Fridays and Saturdays. They're currently closed fishing days to hook and pock gear. We'd be looking to open that on September 1 rather than September 15th. Again, just moving that date back a few weeks to encourage a little bit more fishing in the early fall season. And we'd like to, this is more of a housekeeping amendment than a quota utilization amendment, but eliminate a April 1 to April 22 closure, which vessels, generally offshore trawlers, are prohibited from landing an incidental catch of black sea bass up to 100 pounds. That is kind of a the history on that is we once had a fishery in April, but in several years it kind of became a directed fishery. And we ended up utilizing a ton of our quota in, I believe, 2012, when fishing started early. So by the time, we got to a summer season, there wasn't much quota left. So we adopted a closure for sea bass during April, from April to July 1, but we allowed offshore draggers to bring in, or the offshore fishery to land a bycatch of 100 pounds from January through March, and then the squid fishery, when it starts in state waters, to start landing sea bass that they may catch as a bycatch then on April 23rd. But there's been this remnant closure from April 1 to April 22 that we'd like to just eliminate to allow a bycatch in those offshore trawlers at that time of year. The additional proposals to kind of move those dates back to increase trip limits and eliminate closed fishing days are designed to better utilize that additional quota we're getting this year and buffer against deteriorating weather conditions in the fall. So that's the proposal on that. If there's any questions or comments, I'll take them. Paul Quintal, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself. Paul, I see you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you.
Jared, can you hear me now?
I can, Paul. Go right ahead.
Yep. Thank you for taking my comment. And I will, I'm not sure my question is appropriate for what we have here, but I'm going to run it by you and I entertain your response. Now, I'm 71 years old and I've been running passenger boats in Massachusetts waters for 50 years. And I grew up catching cod in Cape Cod Bay, and I did that for decades. And I am now retired, and I've had the pleasure to buy a small boat my wife and I enjoy, and I keep it in New Bedford. And in the last 3 years, I go out in Buzzards Bay and hope to catch a couple of black sea bass to bring home for supper. And that is my goal. If I can get 2 fish, that is a great day. Now, my question to you is the size limits. Let me ask you this question first. The commercial black sea bass for commercial, is it a 12-inch fish?
It is, yes. Okay.
Now, in the last 3 years, running out of New Bedford, I go out and drop a hook, and I'm now recreational, and I try to catch a 16.5-inch fish. And there are days I got to catch 50 fish to keep one. And my hope is the 12-inch fish for commercial and a 16.5-inch fish for recreational, which I now am. It seems a great disparity. And I'm still involved with a charter boat and I help out once in a while. And you have to catch a lot of sea bass to keep one or two for a recreational fisherman. My hope, my thoughts here are to take and go from a 12-inch black sea bass on commercial to a 13-inch fish or something like that, something bigger, and then give the recreational head boat, charter boat, pleasure boat like myself to catch something that's smaller, maybe a 16 or a 15 and a half inch. So there's a compromise. I'm fishing in the same waters. I throw back a 14-inch fish, and the guy next to me catches it again, and he sells it. That, in my vast years of running boats, is not fair. And I just want to bring that to my opinion of what I see. Now, I've only been doing the black sea bass in out of New Bedford for 3 years. And I just see this as a really great disparity. And I'll leave it at that.
Sure. So I'll try to shed a little light on how we got to where we are with those size limits, and then I'm going to call on my colleague Nicola Meserve to kind of talk briefly about where we're going on recreational black sea bass, because there is some news there that's come up in the past few weeks that may be worth just letting you know about. So the 12-inch commercial limit in Massachusetts is the limit that is established in the federal and interstate plan for sea bass. It's the coastwide legal minimum size, and we adopt that in Massachusetts because we don't want to force boats who are permitted in multiple states to land elsewhere because our rules are more restrictive. And that 12-inch fish is about what you would expect to be the smallest fish that you'd catch in a larger mesh dragger. And it's done to reduce regulatory discarding. And some of the more directed fisheries, hook and line and pot, the value of those fish of the smaller fish is so much less than it is of the larger fish that I expect that there's probably some level of high grading going on in those commercial rod and reel and pot fisheries where the larger fish are retained because of market value and the smaller fish are thrown back. Now, on the recreational side, over the years, we've had to adjust our recreational limits pretty significantly. And one of the ways we've adjusted them to be able to maintain a bag limit of 4 or 5 fish, which is kind of the minimum that our recreational anglers will accept, and a season that includes the end of May, that begins at the end of May and runs as late into the year as possible. Part of our ability to do that has come through several tweaks to the recreational minimum size so as to reduce our recreational harvest. We make it more difficult for recreational anglers to retain fish by raising that minimum size rather than using the other two options at our disposal, which would be reducing the season length and reducing the bag limit further. However, this year we're able to tweak our recreational rules and increase recreational harvest pretty substantially. And Nicola, I'll ask you to kind of fill in the gaps on that because I know you can speak well to where we're at on that process.
Sure, Jared. At this point, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and Mid-Atlantic Council have authorized on the coastwide basis a 20% increase in recreational harvest for sea bass. And we use a regional approach where Massachusetts is in a region with Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York. And our region, because our rules are generally more restrictive than the other regions, we're actually granted a 27% increase as a region. So that's pretty similar to the 30% increase that the commercial fishery is seeing this year to its quota. I expect because of the rules within that region that Massachusetts will actually get a bit more than 20%. We have a proposal that's going before the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission next week for approval, that would show how the region is using that increase. And so our priorities for the recreational fishery this year has been to reduce the size limit by half an inch. It's not enough to get anywhere close to the commercial limit, but it is an improvement. And then also to extend the season. So those are the two things that we've been looking at primarily to get some days back in September and October if we can. So there is going to be, an increase in recreational harvest that is comparable, if not, by percentage greater than the commercial fishery this year. So good news there. And we should be able to get those rules out shortly.
So, Paul, I guess kind of in summary, we're working to move that recreational limit back as best we can within the constraints of the management program. But that 12-inch minimum size on the commercial side is likely to stay where it is because of the benefits to regulatory discarding and the lack of and not wanting to be a state that has more restrictive rules that forces vessels permitted in other states, particularly during the winter fishery, to opt not to land in Massachusetts and go to Rhode Island or Connecticut or New York instead, because that's harmful to our, seafood production industry. But we are cognizant of that disparity, and we are working towards correcting it by moving that recreational minimum size down from the 16.5 level that it's currently at. Dan, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, and I appreciate Paul's comments. This has been one of the great frustrations in the DMF office as we try to reconcile this. But I do want to just point out that the reason that the recreational fishery can't get more fish than it might want is because the Mid-Atlantic Council, through the federal plan, has percentages attributed to the recreational sector versus the commercial sector. And that is not on a state-by-state basis, but it's just overall. And so if you want to catch a sea bass, then you need to come down to New Bedford in May and June where there are no commercial harvests allowed. And you and the other recreational anglers are going to have exclusive access to those fish. And so it's especially painful for us because we do have larger fish up here. And so I take your point about a 12-inch commercial minimum size, especially if those commercial operators are fishing alongside of Massachusetts rec fishermen. That is painful, but that the percentages are constrained by the overall plan. And like I said, if go fishing in May and June, because there's plenty of bigger fish then, and we are working to make it more equitable. We're pretty excited that we're going to come down to 16 inches. We're pretty excited we're going to have a 2 fish allowance in the fall. So but we're not happy about it. But Nicola has worked really hard to get the regions and the other states to work with us on that.
Does that answer your questions, Paul? Just want to make sure before we move on that you're satisfied with the detail on the response.
I appreciate your response. I still don't agree with all of it, but for my life has been growing up taking people out deep sea fishing, and I did cod for a long time, and I can see that the commercial side of it, but if the recreational side of it is a really good driver of economics here in Massachusetts. And if you could just drop the limit for recreational by a little bit, there's a lot of fish we catch that are right on the edge. And I will end that if you could drop it a little bit, just so the guy that spends $100 and goes out for the day and hopes to catch a sea bass to bring home for supper, and if it's just a little bit, would make a big difference. Yes. We have so much fish on the edge, and we throw back dozens and dozens to hope to catch one. And we play by the rules, we do the right stuff. And I'm just backing up the guys who make a living now trying to catch few sea bass and make their customers happy. So thank you for listening. I appreciate the responses of all three of you. And I'll sign off.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Mike Paulson.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good evening.
I kind of think that having two different sizes is stupid. Maybe it's just me because I'm old. But the commercial size and the recreational size should be the same. It doesn't make any sense with the quotas we have. If you have to catch, the recreational guy has to catch 15 fish to get one that he can keep, yet the commercial guy can take them all. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. And I've been fishing for 55 years. I've never seen a 15-inch bass up here in the North Shore. My last question is, what is the sexually maturity size of black sea bass? And that should make a difference in what the minimum size is you can take.
Nick, do you want to discuss the life history of sea bass?
You got a half hour?
It's a pretty complicated situation, Mike, as they
transition
change
from
sex. They transition from females to males as they mature and grow.
I mean, in other fisheries, we have the minimum size is depends on sexual maturity and breedability. I would think there'd be a size in black sea bass like that.
Again, they change sex.
The 12-inch reflects that similar kind of standard, but as Jared explained, we've gotten to a higher size limit in the recreational fishery in order to restrict harvest, whereas in the commercial fishery, we use the quota as the primary tool to do that. So it's the different management approach that has led to that disparity. And given stock status, where the minimum size is not a concern for the sustainability of the fishery right now. But it is to access in the recreational fishery, yes.
Well, then my last recommendation is that if the biological threshold is at 13 inches, then it should be 13 inches for commercial and for recreational. Plain and simple.
Mike, the recreational commercial shares of this fishery are established in the plan. We could do that, but we'd probably have to close the May and June fishery, which is when 90% of the anglers want to go. So we got to give on the bag season size, rules. We've been balancing this for years, and we're hopeful to get that longer season this year. But I take your point, but actually, even Paul's point as well. That's not what's on the agenda here. Like we're talking about commercial trip limits. We're not talking about modifying anything in the realm of minimum sizes. So you can tell us we're off base on this one, but that's not going to change as a result of this public hearing.
I've said enough.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, I'm going to move on to summer flounder. All right, so similar to sea bass, we're going to the most recent stock assessment produced good results. Spawning stock biomass is at 83% of its target, and fishing mortality is at 74% of its threshold. And the biomass is projected to get to its target by 2026, which was faster than previously projected. So a few years back, the quotas were substantially reduced. This year, they're increasing. The coastwide quota is increasing by 74%, while the state quota is increasing by close to 70%. But the coastwide quota is increasing by 45%. The statewide quota is increasing by close to 75%. And part of that is because when the coastwide quota increases above 9.55 million pounds, Massachusetts gets a larger share of the coastwide quota. So we're getting even more fish than the coastwide quota with a 75% increase. So our state quota is going to go up from about 600,000 pounds to about 1 million pounds, which is where it was about where it was in 2022, 2023. So there's a little history here. In 2022, 2020, in the years leading up in the early 2020s, we took a lot of effort to liberalize the summer flounder limit to encourage the utilization of our near million or above million-pound quota. In 2024, the quota was reduced to about 600,000 pounds, response to that stock assessment. And we didn't take any action because, as you can see in the graphs on the right, we were hitting about 600,000 pounds annually based on under current limits. Then in 2024, there were a couple factors that came into play. The squid fishing wasn't very good, which produced a lot of extra effort in the inshore trawl fishery for summer flounder. And we hit the quota a bit earlier than a lot of people that participate in this fishery would have liked. I think we hit the quota in 2024 at the end of August, on August 28th. So that prompted a lot of concern raised in the going into the 2025 season about addressing the limits and maintaining that fishery into September and October. So it closes down about the time that the fish start moving offshore, with the thinking that if there's a little quota left over, then the offshore fishery can have at it in the fall. So we made a couple regulatory adjustments. We eliminated Saturdays as an open fishing day. We dropped trip limits 100 pounds for trawl gear and 75 pounds for hook and line for 2025. And, that achieved its goals. We closed the fishery at the end of October. And part of that is you can see in the 2025 graph that there was a big bump in October. So when the fish moved offshore, they hung out off Block Island, and there was a good pulse of offshore fishing effort that took those fish in October. If that effort hadn't occurred, we would have ran a quota underage this year. And I had anticipated we would until that occurred. So with this increase in the quota for 2026 and 27, we want to roll back some of those changes we made last year and put Saturdays back in the fishery and increase those trip limits back up by 100 pounds from 500 to 600 for net fishers and 325 to 400 for hook fishers. And then we also wanted to make two changes to how we address the period 1, which is the wintertime offshore fishery, and the period 2 fishery, which begins on April 23rd and continues based on quota availability, so that there's less yo-yoing of these rules year to year. And these are kind of technical, but bear with me. So in years when the quota is above 750,000 pounds, we want to use the a 30-70 split between period 1 and period 2, which was the historic split in allocation. And then in years when the quota is less than 750,000 pounds, we want to give more of that quota to the inshore dayboat fleet and go to the current quota allocation, which is 15% to period 1 and 85% to period 2. Then we want to establish a quota-based trip limit for period 1. So when they get that 30%, when the quota is over 750,000 pounds, we want the period 1 trip limit to be at least 5,000 pounds. That's a profitable trip for an offshore boat fishing in the winter. And then in years when that is less, we want to still have them have an opportunity to catch the fish. But given that it will be a smaller percentage of a smaller quota, we want to reduce that trip limit down to about 2,000 pounds. So those are the proposals. They're designed to kind of finesse how that period 1 wintertime offshore fishery is managed based on quota availability, and then give back what we took out last year so that the period 2 fishery can function as it had in the prior years, with the goal of achieving a near £1 million quota. So I'll take questions and comments on this. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions or comment. Oh, Mike Paulison. Can always count on you, Mike. What's going on?
I gotta make a comment here. All I can tell you is I see all the ways you guys are chopping it up. All I want to do is see the state of Massachusetts fishermen catch 100% of what they're allocated. And however you want to chop it up is fine. It wouldn't hurt me a bit to see some of these trips you're talking about, like in the first period of 5,000 pounds, make it 6 or 7. If they catch the percentage in the first part of it, then you close it a couple of weeks early. And when you open it again, they let them fish the rest. You know, I'm just afraid that the fish are going to escape and our guys ain't going to get a chance to catch all they can. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, thanks. All right, Dan, I'm going to turn this back over to you for the finale.
All right, thank you, Jared. Nice job on those 3 species. Thanks everyone for bearing with us with some of those detailed proposals. But as you can tell, we spend a lot of time monitoring these quotas, understanding the performances of the various gear types, and what we're proposing in those 3 species really reflects, I believe, a really good understanding of how these fisheries are operating. So anyway, good job on that, Jared and Nicola. So our last issue is a proposal to amend our horseshoe crab quotas. We're proposing to reduce the bait quota from the current 140,000 crab quota down to 100,000, and then reallocate these 40,000 crabs to the biomedical quota at a 1-to-2 ratio, thereby increasing the biomedical quota from 200,000 to 280,000. So next slide. Barry, can we advance that slide? Okay. Next slide is the math. So I know there's been a fair amount of comments on this that kind of took us by surprise, because I think some in the public feel that we're somehow increasing mortality, but we actually believe that we're reducing mortality. So as you know, when a crab is caught for purposes of bait, it's going into a trap, cut up, it's going into a freezer. There's a 100% mortality rate of that crab. Whereas the biomedical fishery has what we believe at this point is a 15% release mortality rate. It could be a different number. We're hoping to conduct some research on that, but that is the accepted value among the technical committee at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and that number is one that I know the biomedical firms and the fishermen who participate in the biomedical fishery work hard to keep low through what we call best management practices. There are regulations and permit conditions that require the crabs be handled in such a way that that will maximize survival. So this proposal is to reduce the crab quota by 40,000, and as I mentioned before, using a 1-to-2 ratio. So the reason that's conservative is with a 15% release mortality, in theory, we could go to a 1-to-6 ratio, or even a little bit higher, relative to the equivalent number of crabs that would be killed. So the final set of bullets down here, you can see the math that 140,000 crabs at 100% mortality plus 200,000 biomedical crabs at 15% mortality is what we estimate to be 170,000 dead crabs in Massachusetts. But by reducing the bait fishery by 40 and increasing the biomedical by 80, our new estimate is 142,000 crabs killed in the Massachusetts fishery, which is an overall reduction of 28,000 crabs. So I have a whole bunch of slides about the status of the resource that, if you'll indulge me, I just want to go over. And I also have Derek Perry with us tonight, and he's our horseshoe crab technical specialist and serves on the horseshoe crab technical committee at ASMFC. But you know, we're confident that the horseshoe crab status is improving and on an upward trajectory. The 2019 benchmark assessment was embraced by all the states on the East, all the state's biologists on the East Coast, as well as the 2024. And the Northeast region of the horseshoe crab subpopulation, those increases were largely driven by the increases we see in the Commonwealth. And what we see, and I'm going to bring these up shortly, is increases in most of our spawning beach surveys, increases in our trawl surveys, increases in the beach seine surveys. And we have a lot of confidence in this. So there's also a group called the IUCN, which is an entity out of Switzerland that has published findings in the past with a lot of concerns about horseshoe crabs. But in their most recent report, they have determined that the Northeast region they're calling viable. There was a report put out by Smith as part of the IUCN, reporting that horseshoe crab populations are improving in the Northeast region. So now I'll go over the 3 relative abundance surveys. The first one is our trawl survey. Now, our trawl survey is not, it's a multi-purpose species, a multi-species survey, like the same trawl survey that we are going to collect and measure lobsters and cod and other species, also collects horseshoe crabs. And we have seen some significant upward growth especially in the numbers of crabs south of Cape Cod. You can see on the map or in this chart that in the spring, those are the smooth trend lines. And what's notable is we've seen most of this growth after 2010, and it was in 2010 that we went to a new management approach, which was the adoption of the luna closures. And now it's been 16 years since those closures went into effect, and we think that protecting some of those spawning crabs has had some real recruitment boosts. The increases north of the Cape are not as pronounced, but if you look at the y-axis, you can see that there's almost an order of magnitude fewer crabs north of the Cape, and very few crabs are caught in our fishery north of the Cape, especially in the last few years, for regulatory reasons. Now we get to the horseshoe crab spawning beach survey. Many of you have probably already seen this. Our spawning beach survey began in 2008. The surveys are conducted at high tides during day and night using quadrats. Data is collected by DMF, but more importantly by a whole lot of other volunteer groups. And we have 71% of the sites are above the time series median in 2025, and 90% of the sites have shown increasing trends over the past 10 years. And all of the Nantucket Sound sites where our fishery occurs shows increasing trends over the past 10 to 15-year time series. And finally, the Outer Cape sites along Pleasant Bay has had a similarly positive trend, and that area has been harvested for biomedical purposes for over 50 years. And today, actually for the last 20 years, we've made it an exclusively biomedical harvest area. And here's our third fishery independent trend, and this is our beach seine survey, and this beach seine survey is done in 3 embayments south of Cape Cod, or other Cape Cod southern shoreline. And this was a survey that was begun back in the 80s to detect winter flounder primarily, but we've continued this time series even as the species composition has evolved over time. So now we feel it's a pretty useful index for the relative abundance of especially younger horseshoe crabs in these shallow embayments. And you can see the results there that we're seeing a lot of positive trends. And again, especially since that 2010 time period when we changed our management regime, we used to have weekend closures, and we replaced those with the lunar closures. So next slide. So this is just a brief history of the horseshoe crab fishery management in Massachusetts. Back in 2000, the interstate plan was created, and our initial quota was around 330,000 crabs. Consistent with the plan, we did create a mandatory reporting system to effectively monitor the quota. In 2006, we took the action to close the Pleasant Bay complex. That is that pink, that reddish pink area down in the elbow of Cape Cod and around the Chatham area. In 2008, after considering the performance of the fishery, we felt that maybe the earlier numbers were, because they were generated prior to mandatory reporting, we felt that those numbers may be too high. And so we reduced our quota by half. ASMFC still allows a higher bait harvest, but we opted to reduce that to 165. In 2010, we replaced those 5-day lunar closures. Replaced the weekend closures with the 5-day lunar closures, and we adopted a 7-inch size limit across the shell. And then in 2023 and in 2024, we took some significant actions. First, in 2023, we reduced the bait quota to 140,000 crabs, and we created a first ever biomedical quota of 200,000 crabs. When I say first ever, we're actually the first and the only state that actually is regulating the biomedical quota. And we adopted that number based on the prior year's landings with a little bit of a buffer. And we also implemented the best management practices for the processors and the dealers as regulation. And so that, we think, also enhances survival. The most significant actions we've ever taken, and this was not done easily. It came with a lot of consternation, and there's still a lot of resentment about it. But we adopted an April 16th to June 7th harvest closure to all harvest. And we prohibited, under state authority, the harvest of crabs from the federal closed areas. But getting back to that spawning closure, that's a big deal. Most of the other states that have closures still allow some level of harvest during the spawning season, but at this point we do not. And that rule actually had some very negative effects on fishery participants, especially those hand harvesters that had been in this fishery for a very long time. And we used to take about 50% of the crabs by mobile gear and about 50% by hand. but now it's well in excess of about 95% by mobile gear, and it's essentially almost eliminated all the hand harvest. So here's the horseshoe crab fishery performance. We've got the bait crabs landed, the vessel, and the average price. You can see that the 140,000 crab quota that we've had over the last few years, we come very close to those, and we rarely hit a number exactly right, because what we do in our quota monitoring system is we use, as we monitor the quota, we use last week's landings to forecast the current week's landings or next week's landings. So often there's a little bit of variability in our and whether we hit the number spot on. But now nearly all the landings come from Nantucket Sound, 97% in 2024. It's almost exclusively mobile gear. There's about 20 draggers that annually participate in the fishery and sell to about 10 dealers. Almost all the bait quota is also repurposed through what we call the rent-a-crab program. That's just a DMF term where we allow and encourage the bait dealers that buy the crabs to store them temporarily and allow the biomedical firms to capitalize on those crabs that are going into either frozen storage or going into a pot by just giving them access to the blood. The other thing is the rent-a-crab program does help buoy the price of crabs, because obviously a crab has a dual use when it's able to be bled, and so that's a positive. You can see that the ex-vessel price last year was $3.29, which is substantially higher than 2022, and that's no doubt a reflection of the fact that most of those crabs were bled. Most of those crabs that were destined for the bait market were bled. And the other thing to consider is, we've had a lot of conversations with bait dealers in the fall, and even with some of the biomedical processors that take in biomedical harvested crabs as well as bait crabs. What we learned is that the bait dealers at this point have an ample supply of bait, and the biomedical harvest, the biomedical demand for bait crabs is sort of driving the bait harvest and creating what we describe here as a market misalignment. And what I mean by that is there was more crabs being bought and bled, and say in the early months of June and July, than the bait market actually were looking for. And when you couple that with an overall decline in the demand for some of the bait, we felt that we could maybe reduce this bait quota. On the biomedical side, we have 2 processors. They accept crabs from up to 12 harvesters per year, and those harvesters include not just draggers, but some others who work in like the Pleasant Bay area and other locations where they can get a steady supply of crabs. But most of the harvest, majority of it does come from mobile gear vessels operating in Nantucket Sound. The hand harvest that does continue in the biomedical fishery is in the Pleasant Bay area and Nauset Inlet, and I think it's because those embayments provide harvest opportunities beyond the spawning season. And what's mentioned here is most of that crab quota is taken each year, but exact figures are confidential under the rule of 3. And I just want to mention the confidentiality rule of 3. It's frustrating to us as well in many fisheries management applications where some of these numbers may be obvious or may be minuscule, but if there's fewer than 3 entities in that sum, then by law we can't reveal it. So to the public who might have a kind of a mistrust when they see the government talking about data that's confidential. All it means is there's fewer than 3 participants in that cell. But in most cases, you can see what the totals look on either side of that cell and know that it's just not that significant. But suffice to say, the 200,000 crab quota is pretty routinely taken. You can see here that the 2024 bait fishery landings by region is 97% from Nantucket Sound. Okay, the whelk fishery, or the conch pot fishery, as we call it, is an interesting one because that fishery peaked around 2010, 2012, and in hindsight, there was probably excessive amounts of harvest that relative to the standing stock, but and you've probably heard us say that the fishery is depleted, quote unquote, but there's still a lot of whelks to be caught, and it's still an important part of the working waterfront and a pretty important part of the business plans of a lot of the participants in that fishery, even as we have increased the minimum sizes for conservation. But I think one of the most striking aspects of this is that because of the reduced number of very large whelks, because of the lower, the regulations, and because of changing in markets. For example, I believe China had curtailed their buying of whelks last year. Almost all the whelks are exported. So, because of that, the participation in this fishery has gone down. And you can see on the graph that the conch pot hauls back in the year 2012 peaked at around 600,000 crabs. I'm sorry, 600,000 pot hauls, but that number has steadily declined in 2024, it was just 200,000 pot hauls. So in that number represents like a 2/3 decline in the number of pot hauls. So we don't have 2025 numbers yet because we still have to process all the catch reports that come in from last year. But we felt, looking at these trends, that we would be on safe ground reducing the bait quota because there's less bait being needed by our local fishery, just because of the number of trap hauls. Every time you haul a trap, you have to put bait in it. And so the fewer trap hauls that you execute, the less bait you need. So, that was a big part of our rationale to coming up with this. So again, here's the proposal. Last slide, next slide, Jared. We believe the stock assessment trends and the survey indices are positive. We believe, and ASMFC believes, in the IUCN believe that the population is in good condition and growing, particularly in Nantucket Sound, where nearly all the harvest occurs. The proposal is conservative positive, or conservation positive, for the resource, by instead of using a 1-to-6 ratio of what we would expect to die, where we just want to go 1-to-2, and we think that that's appropriate. It attempts to address what we describe as a misalignment in the bait market, where a lot of bait crabs were being bought and bled with no place to go. So we think that this makes more sense to put more quota into the biomedical side of the equation. We are going to continue the Rent-a-Crab program because of the benefit that it provides. And we believe that there is some growth. In other words, the 100,000 crab quota should allow for should the whelk pot fishery rebound, and should there be more effort, up to like 3 let's say they get up to 300,000 trap holes, which would be a 50% increase over last year or over 2024. We believe there'll still be enough crabs here. And we think it would increase crabs for the biomedical industry by 80,000. And so that's our proposal. And I know there's probably going to be a lot of questions. So before we get into the questions, I would like to comment that I was kind of disappointed in sort of some of the responses we got to this because of what I'm guessing is what I would feel is misinformation. And I would invite any of the formal groups that helped organize letter writing campaigns. If you would like to come out and have us meet with your organization or your constituents, we would be really happy to do that. You know, there's 51 people on this. I bet we have way more than 51 letters, so I'm not sure that everyone who wrote a letter, you know, is going to have the opportunity to hear what I just gave you in terms of background information, but also to sort of probe the issues with our professional staff. So I really would like to make that offer to any of the groups that are involved in horseshoe crab advocacy, because we do hold a meeting every year in the spring. It's called the Horseshoe Crab Science Meeting, and I think this past spring or a year ago it was a full house. So there's more and more people taking an interest in it, and I know that folks who attended really learned a lot about the serious approach that we take to horseshoe crab management. We probably spend almost as much time. It's number 2 to lobster. You know, the number of staff that spend their working hours at DMF on horseshoe crabs is only second to those that work on lobster, and which is pretty amazing given the where it fits in terms of seafood. But we understand the ecological significance of horseshoe crabs and also the public health benefits of horseshoe crabs. And we still stand by the benefits of that spawning closure and the benefits to recruitment that I think we're going to see over the next decade. So I will stop there. Thank you for indulging me. And Jared, why don't we take some questions?
I think, given the number of people on here for horseshoe crabs, maybe we just jump right into it and deal with them as they come.
Okay. So
All right.
questions and comments. So we just
Questions and
recognize
comments,
people.
so we'll deal
All
with
right.
it as it comes. Cheryl Heller, you're recognized.
Thank you. Dan, I do appreciate your offer to come and speak to our group. Would very much like to follow up with you on that. I'm speaking in opposition to the proposal for the Massachusetts Horseshoe Crab Collaborative. Decades of state mismanagement, beginning in the 1940s with an eradication program, have left horseshoe crabs depleted, with disastrous consequences for shorebirds and the coastal ecosystems that depend on them. This decline is the result of management decisions that failed to prioritize recovery, ignored warning signs, and continued exploitation long after populations were already depleted. We are asking you to change course. First, acknowledge past state mismanagement and provide a transparent accounting of current horseshoe crab populations compared to historic levels. Second, immediately reduce mortality by ending the bait fishery, prohibit all harvest through July, which is the historic spawning season, and close depleted historic spawning and nursery areas. Third, retain the current biomedical cap and develop a plan to phase it out. Finally, commit to recovery by formally recognizing horseshoe crabs as essential to coastal biodiversity and adopt clear, measurable restoration targets consistent with the governor's biodiversity initiative. We are asking you to withdraw this proposal and move urgently toward regulations to rebuild horseshoe crab populations, following the lead of New York and Connecticut, whose legislators have recently acted to protect their horseshoe crab populations. And I do have a question. Dan, you have never explained why you have raised the biomedical quota from 200,000 to 280,000. I recall your proposal back in 2023 when you were concerned that there was too much pressure from biomedical companies coming into Massachusetts and you wanted to limit that. So I still have not heard an explanation about why you're raising this quota for the biomedical. Thank you for listening to me.
Charles, thank you. Those are good comments. I just want to say that we believe, and we took the action to basically close the fishery when so many of those crabs were accessible to beach harvest, that is essentially gutted that practice. And what's left, people don't rush out on June 8th to go horseshoe crabbing anymore because there's almost nothing left. I mean, while it may be true, you could probably find a few. Then when we look at our statistics, we're very confident that the net effect of that rule has had a huge impact on the local harvest, especially in your area, the Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury, where prior to our rule, 97% of the crabs in that area were taken during the period that we've now closed. So we believe that has a huge effect, and I'm not sure more regulation is needed. As far as why we would want to increase this, as the stock continues to recover, in our view, we're just trying to manage the overall mortality. And to go back to the math, we believe that this is a net conservation positive proposal. As we mentioned in one of the slides, the harvest of crabs under the bait quota was, we think, larger than what the bait demands in Massachusetts were. So, and then I go back to the math. So we're reducing the bait quota. We think that there's ample room to increase this biomedical quota given the 15% mortality rate. So I think if we can send you this presentation, and hopefully you'll consider these points in your approach to our fisheries management plan. So
Dan, do you mind if I just jump in with a little addition there?
Sure, Jared.
So a little on the history of these quotas. We, until 2023, we did not have a biomedical quota. Then in 2022, we had an additional firm come into Massachusetts to begin extracting crabs for biomedical purpose, and we saw a huge jump in the amount of landings attributable to the biomedical fishery, and that was a cause for concern because it was something that was an unprecedented increase in that harvest. So our action for 2023 was to cap total landings and create a biomedical quota based on historic biomedical performance and a reduction in the bait quota from 165,000 crabs to 140,000 crabs, and reallocate those 25,000 crabs to the biomedical fishery on a 1-to-6 ratio, and add in the crabs that were historically harvested. That brought us to about 200,000 crabs, and that capped overall mortality at where it had been prior to the new biomedical firm coming into Massachusetts. So cap mortality of where it was, or cap mortality of where it was in 2022. So that mortality couldn't expand any further. And we're comfortable with that considering we continue to see increases in all our survey trends. Additionally, for this year, what we're looking to do is, as Dan said, address that market misalignment by reducing the bait quota to a number that is more consistent with what bait demand is, while easing the reliance of the rent-a-crab program by reallocating some of those crabs to the biomedical fishery at a more conservative 1-to-2 ratio, to increase the biomedical quota up to 280,000, while also having a net positive reduction of 28,000 crabs in total mortality. So there's a little history there. So, you know, what we are concerned about in 2022 about this entrance of this new firm, we addressed with the rules in 2023 by capping overall mortality. And now for 2026, we're not looking to increase overall mortality. We're actually reducing that just through reallocation. So I just wanted to make to kind of draw that out in response to Cheryl's question. Next up, we have Mike Paulison.
Good day, I'm back. What is
on you for that, Mike? What's up?
What is the state of the total biomass of the crabs at this point?
We don't have a total biomass survey. We have a relative abundance index, and the relative abundance is improving, particularly compared to the status of the resource in 2010.
All right. I would like to see you guys do away with the bait fishery 100%. When you look at the mortality rate even on 100,000 crabs at 100,000 crabs, versus if you took that 100,000 crabs and put it in the medical, you're only going to lose 15% of them. That's a no-brainer. And as far as bait for the conch guys, maybe it is the preferred bait, but there's alternative baits for every fishery. All you got to do is look for it and you'll find something. We see that on the North Shore with lobsters. 75% of the bait that's used up here comes from overseas. So you can always find something. By doing away with the bait fishery on the crabs, you're protecting the crab fishery. You're going to help it recover a lot quicker. And the biomedical department is more conducive to helping the humans like you and me. And that should be taken into consideration compared to somebody putting it on the hook to catch a conch. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Well, John Moran, you're up next.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, John. Go right ahead.
Okay, I am the vice president and volunteer for the Mass Conch Association, and I just wanted to weigh in on this. The association is against this change in quota for the bait fishery for the reason that once it changes, it will probably never be able to get it back. And as many of you know, this is an essential bait for the conch fishery. It's not something where you can just change it out. What happens here is what fishermen are doing in order to stretch the conch, so they don't have, in order to stretch the horseshoe crabs along, they are mixing it with other things, but without the horseshoe crab in the mix, it's very unsuccessful. And some of the concerns that the association has is other states have outright banned the harvest or the reduction in the harvest of the horseshoe crab for bait. So if we're not able to get the horseshoe crab bait from the state of Massachusetts, we're not going to be able to get it anywhere else. So that's the concern. This is a small boat near shore fishery. that has many economic spin-offs into the communities in which they serve. I just wanted to say that at this point in time, the association is against the change in the allocation of quota.
Thank you, John. Sharon Young, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi. I just have a couple points I'd like to make, and it's based on the actual use of these crabs in the biomedical community. Now, I happen to know that the United States Pharmacopoeia initiated Chapter 86, which basically allows for a synthetic, excuse me, recombinant factor, synthetic alternative to the actual extraction of the blood cells from the horseshoe crabs to do the endotoxin testing. Okay, that went through back in 2023. And in addition to that, there was also an RCR, which is more of a comprehensive type of testing that can be done to go through more than just the endotoxin testing. So I'm kind of wondering if we can do this with synthetics, which will provide very consistent data because you're making them in batches and it's all the same. And Eli Lilly has started to use these non-animal or non-marine type of sources. I'd like to know, why is it that we still have to use these numbers to do this when we do have the technology to avoid it? That's it.
So
those are rhetorical questions to the Division of Marine Fisheries because we are not the FDA. So, but I appreciate your spirit and your comments in that regard.
But the point is, it would help maybe if you had a dialogue with them to understand that they're alternatives to actually extracting these crabs and using them to bleed, when we actually have actual means to do this through synthetic type of reagent instead of using the horseshoe crabs.
Yeah,
it's the same. It offers the same benefits without.
No, we get that, but that's
but I'm going to disagree with that, Dan. I do not think they provide the same benefits. From my conversations with biomedical firms, again, not a public health expert, but they are not comparable. The LAL tests are better tests for public health at this point. And I think there's also a significant cost factor involved in the transition of many biomedical products. From comments and conversations I've had with the biomedical industry, the prevailing view is that they're not in a position to transition immediately. The transition will happen, but it's going to be over a much longer window of time. And then there's other functions of that LAL product, that to deal with fungal infections that there is not a synthetic for as well. So I think that that would be my non-public health expert answer for that, just based on conversations I've had with the biomedical industry.
And Jared, if there are any biomedical representatives on the call tonight, if they want to weigh in, that's fine. But I don't think the agency is going to weigh that judgment for you tonight.
Okay, but and you have around 90% or greater you're talking about the LAL, and yes, this is used to test IV fluids. It's used to test biomedical products for contaminants so that patients don't get sick. Okay, and that's the function of the RCR, not the RFC. So the RFC specifically looks at endotoxins. The RCR looks at a much broader scale for other products and not just the actual endotoxin itself. So I'm just pointing that out to you, gentlemen. So it's food for thought, and I'm hoping that my comments will have some kind of impact. have no idea. But it's a learning process. And I've spent a lot of time researching this, and I thought I'd share it with you and maybe strike up a conversation with some of these other companies. I don't know if Eli Lilly is based, if you have them in Massachusetts, but they're one of the one of the companies that I am aware of that has been starting to use synthetic alternatives to the horseshoe crab blood to do endotoxin testing and et cetera. So.
Thank you, Sharon. Mark Fagerty, you're up.
Hello.
Mark, you there? Hi.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so this has been a tough one, I know, for the conservation community to get its head around, and I know, Dan was surprised at the reaction, and I think what we've all underestimated is how much people hate the biomedical industry. I've been working on this for 18 years in my capacity at Mass Audubon, and I've appreciated working with the division on this, over those years. And we were there for the lunar closures and providing prosomal width data and tagging data. And we partnered on 3 different masters projects on horseshoe crabs with the division. And, we appreciate all of the efforts to better manage this fishery over the years, from cutting the ASMFC quota in half to the lunar closures, and especially the spawning season protections of 2 years ago. In all the years of giving talks and talking to people and parties, everything, everybody is very focused on the biomedical industry. It gets tons of press, and it just comes down to this. I don't get why they still do it if there's a synthetic alternative. And we know it's much more complex than that. The LAL industry will need to continue for quite some time, and there's a fungal test with no synthetic alternative based on LAL, and it's complicated, and we get that. But I think a lot of people, want it to be simple, and I think we have some similar questions, we at Mass Audubon, about why the increase in biomedical quota so soon after the 200,000 cap from 2 years ago. That our understanding was to allow for growth. And so why 2 years later adding another 80,000 crabs? I will say that Mass Audubon does support this 30% reduction in the bait quota, of course. We support the saving of close to 30,000 crabs, theoretically, under this plan. We do have those same questions about why the biomedical quota is going up. And I think a lot of people are really fixating on that, and they really don't like that industry. They don't understand why, with synthetic alternatives available, that demand would be going up. And so there are some questions about where is that demand coming from? Why the 1-to-2 reallocation instead of 1-to-1? I think we'd like to see a commitment to not increasing that overall harvest anymore. As bait quota gets transferred to biomedical, which we support, it really should just be 1-to-1, and we shouldn't keep raising that. I do understand what you're trying to say with the 1-to-2 versus 1-to-6. I think that's a little wonky for most people. Just keeping it as, this proposal saves 28,000 crabs. Those are crabs that won't be dead. Those are crabs that will still be in the ecosystem doing their job. Like every other conservation organization, Mass Audubon wants to see a complete end to the bait harvest, as other states have done, as we just saw New York, Connecticut, New Jersey a long time ago, South Carolina a long time ago, Delaware Bay, you can't harvest females there, and that's been upheld. So that the bait harvest is a relic. It's outdated. It's unnecessary. Let's rip that Band-Aid off. If you want to keep fishing the whelk until they're gone, then let's not bring the horseshoe crabs with them. Let's let them do it with green crabs and clam guts, right? People have been studying the alternatives for 20 years. It's time to put them into practice, put everybody on a level playing field, and just end that bait harvest. You can't make it make sense from somebody looking from the outside. You're propping up a whelk fishery that, in your own words, is depleted, overfished, with overfishing continuing. And then you're taking a horseshoe crab out of the ecosystem, where it's going to take 11 years to replace that crab in the system. And then you're putting it in a freezer in New Bedford or whatever for a failing fishery. You can't make that make sense to people. I sometimes question the legality of this whole management structure. I appreciate the complexities of managing all these interconnected fisheries. It must be like doing a Rubik's Cube that you can never solve. I do understand that. But the bait harvest has to go. And I think if you make a plan to phase that out, you can head off what happened in other states where the legislature superseded the regulatory agencies and did their job for them. I assume you don't want that to happen. So I would encourage making a plan, 3-5 years, whatever it is, to phase out the bait harvest. The era of that making any sense is long over. I wasn't able to get my written comments up, so I'm sort of winging it here. Probably other things I wanted to say, but that's the gist of it. And again, Mass Audubon does support the reduction in the quota. We would like to see a 1-to-1 ratio and not continually increasing the biomedical quota. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Carol Carson? Carol, you there? Carol, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you, so I'm going to come back to you at the end of the queue. Matt Sure, you're next.
Second. Hi, I just wanted to say I broadly agree with Mark's points, and I'd just like to add that as someone who's not here specifically for the horseshoe crabs, and I don't even really know who any of those people are, I was a little disturbed by the tone of animosity and frustration evident in DMF's opening introduction to public comment toward that specific cohort of citizens and stakeholders. I would hope that you're taking their comments as seriously as you do those from the fishing industry or anybody else.
Yeah, Matt, if I could just address that. I mean, one of the comments that I was referring to, but I didn't mention, is, was referenced the removal of spawning crabs from beaches. And I guess if I had a chance to address that group, I would have explained that we believe that the closure, that 7-week closure, did exactly that. And the data show that the harvest by beach pickers has gone to practically zero. And yet that was a major argument made to us by some of the groups. So I just want the opportunity for my staff to have the opportunity to educate folks, because some of the things we were being criticized for, we had solved 2 years ago.
Brett Hoffmeister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Jared. Brett Hoffmeister, Associates of Cape Cod. I'm the sustainability manager, and I just wanted to clarify some of the positions regarding the synthetics in response to the earlier comments. To be clear, there's 4 companies in the United States that make these endotoxin reagents out of horseshoe crab blood. All 4 of those companies have synthetics available, and all 4 of us would like to sell more synthetics. What needs to be understood is that the regulatory landscape, not only in the United States, but around the world, is very difficult to manage by design. It's slow, it's methodical, and it takes years of data to ensure that products that are going to be injected or implanted into human bodies are going to be safe. So this is an issue that you cannot force. It's something that you cannot do overnight. Chapter 86 kind of clears the path in the woods to get there, but it hasn't paved the road yet. It's going to take volumes and volumes of data from the pharmaceutical companies that are using these products to convince the FDA in the United States, in Japan, in Europe, in Canada, that this is safe and that humans won't be harmed by its use. Until that happens, until we get that global harmonization, it's going to be impeded. And that's the simple truth. This is a product that helps save lives. It helps improve the quality of human life around the planet.
It's not just an issue in the United States. So we're enthusiastic about the technology that we have. We think we have a great product that's going to change the face of medicine in the future, just the way LAL changed the face of medicine when it replaced the rapid pyrogen test. But it's going to take time. And this is something that you just simply cannot force upon the regulatory agencies because the cost of error is human tragedy. And that's something that our regulatory agencies simply cannot allow. So that's all.
Thank you, Brett. Carol Carson, go back to you again. Carol, you can use the chat and I can read your question and comment into the record, or you could submit a written question, but it doesn't appear that your audio is working this evening. Andrew Walsh?
Thank
Andrew,
you,
there?
Jared.
Oh, good evening, Andrew.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so my position with this proposal is that it's too drastic of a change for the fishing industry at this time. I think that although you have good intentions with it to try to help with conservation and stuff, I think it's going to create some problems with industry, and it might create more problems than it'll solve. I don't believe it adequately takes into consideration the bycatch needs of the mixed trawl fishery. And I think that by taking 40,000 crabs from the so-called bait fishery, which is really the only pot that industry has control of to cover bycatch, without an IFQ and having to work directly with the biomedical industry. I think that if you remove that 40,000 crabs, that there's a possibility that next year it'll end up leading to some forced regulatory discards by boats that are relying on that quota to cover bycatch. It'll also, in the future, possibly impede the conch pot fishery from getting the bait that they need. I think that the mixed trawl fishery at a minimum needs these crabs that we have allocated to us now. Whether it's fully for bait or some of it gets switched to biomedical, but it needs to be set aside for bycatch, not a directed fishery. Any amount less than that will negatively impact the conservation efforts that I think DMF is trying to achieve with this proposal. And for that reason, I'm asking that you maintain status quo. And I would like that, over the course of the next year or a couple of years, that maybe we could have some meetings and try to hash out between the fishing industry, all participants in the mixed trawl fishery, and maybe try to get the biomedical companies involved all as one, joint conversation with DMF and try to figure out what the needs are for both the biomedical industry and for the fishing industry. And that includes making sure that the pot fishery has bait in the future. I think that, if we have meetings like this, it needs to be looked at it from a holistic perspective, and that we need to take into account not just horseshoe crabs, but our fluke regulations and the way that we target fluke, our conch regulations in the trawl fishery and the way that we target conch, scup and sea bass, mesh sizes. I think that there's a lot that we need to look at before we take drastic measures like this. With that said, if DMF does insist on moving forward with a quota transfer without addressing the underlying issues that I'm talking about, I think you at least need to put some safeguards in place to prevent the possibility of next year having these regulatory discards that industry isn't able to avoid in the trawl fishery while we're targeting other things. And one possibility might be implementing trip limits on the biomedical catch that coincides and parallels the bait fishery, at least until September 1st. After September 1st, when the mixed trawl fishery generally moves out of the sound, it won't be as much of an issue. And then the directed fishery could possibly take off from there. But while the mixed trawl fishery is targeting fluke and other species, we need to make sure that we have the quota available to all boats in the fishery for bycatch purposes, because fishermen want to conserve too. You know, we're not out there trying to have regulatory discards or throw things over or, you know, hurt anything. I want to keep anything I catch, and I don't like throwing over dead discards or, you know, it's just a concern that I think a lot of fishermen have, and I think a lot of fishermen would agree with me on this. These are all my personal opinions, and maybe somebody else on here has opinions of their own, but I appreciate taking the time to listen to my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Carol, I'll go to you one more time. All right, still not working. Phil, Micho, how you doing?
Hello there.
Hey, Phil.
Boy, one thing I've learned after participating in fisheries meetings the last 40 years is science is so involved in it. You guys, all your decisions are based on science. All these adjustments, everything you've been doing, I've seen a lot of conservation over the years with these horseshoe crabs, along with all the other species, and it's amazing. And I really wish that these people that are, I get they're worried about the horseshoe crab, but the population is increasing more and more and more, and all the steps you've taken to rebuild it and to be cautious and conservative, it's amazing. And it's hard to sit here and listen to you get slammed by the environmental groups like you drop the ball. You guys are putting so much resource into these horseshoe crabs. You're putting biologists on our boats. You're putting them on the ground. You send them to the lab. And it's amazing the amount of effort you guys are putting into this. And we really need these people to look at the science, look at what's going on, look at the amount of crab that's actually out there, and the fact that it's saving lives. The zero mortality the last 4 years on my boat. The things are going back into the ocean alive. They're not. It's not 15%. It's not 50%. I don't know why they're pushing it like that. It's not the case. We need these biologists, and we need your efforts put into other fisheries in the state of Massachusetts. There's a lot of other fisheries that need your attention, but unfortunately, you're forced to do what you're doing here. As far as the mobile gear goes, with the bait fishery, I did it for many years. 4 or 5 years ago, I was requested to go after the biomedical crab for the lab. Some of the boats they had doing it, it wasn't producing, it wasn't steady. And myself and another boat, we partnered up, and we were able to make it work. And a lot of trial and error. A lot of days we didn't make money, and we got the ball rolling. And we learned how to handle them and get the mortality to zero. And it took a lot to do that. And we're dedicated to producing so that their crew has full employment, that they can count on us. We go when the wind's blowing, and we're steady. And that needs to be able to continue. And as far as the bait fishery goes, I really hope the whelk does come back. And I know they need the horseshoe crab because it's an effective bait. That's why they use it. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. All right, Dan, that's all I'm saying for public comment this evening.
Great. All right. Well, thanks Thanks to the staff. Thanks to you, Jared and Nicola, and folks who chimed in. Thank you to the public for participating. And we will accept written comments through Friday, March 6th. And we'll do it again next Wednesday night, especially for folks who were without power and weren't able to dial into tonight's meeting. So have a great night, and I wish you well, and thank you for attending.